make a gigantic circus about silly things like pronouns, right?
The vendetta view about pronouns.
Pronouns, or there's all kinds of things like this. Like, oh God, I can't possibly be, a decent human being and call you the name you'd like to be called, because that's an infringement on my human rights.
So, are concerns over pronouns as frivolous as was discussed?
Okay, so Morgane Oger and people on Morgane's side of the debate regularly want to suggest that referring to a transgender, someone like Morgane, using she or her is just being a decent human being, right? And why can't you just be a decent human being? Because this is just, it's trivial for you to refuse to do that. I would suggest that it's not a trivial issue. Okay, so I've been in this debate now going on 2 or 3 years, and from almost day one it became apparent to me, abundantly apparent to me, that language was being used as a psychological and political weapon to condition people and to bludgeon them into submission to transgender ideology. Okay, so it is not a mere trifle. So the reason it's important, and let me just say that in terms of an act of respect, the act of respect that I give to Morgane Oger is that Morgane has adopted the name Morgane, okay? Just like I've adopted the name Jenn. So I, out of respect, will agree to use Morgane. Okay, that's a respect. I don't use Morgane's male name, right? That would be sort of like referring to Muhammad Ali as Cassius. Like, why would you do that? There's no point in doing that. So I show Morgane respect by doing that. But when Morgane says that I must refer to Morgane as a woman and as a she and as a her, that's a big ask. Okay, that's asking me to basically reprogram my brain and surrender physical reality. But it gets even more insidious than that. So, for instance, Jennifer Bielek, who writes for the Federalist in the United States, she's described language or compared language to street signs. Okay, so important street signs have to mean the same thing to everybody all the time. If they don't, you're going to get chaos, right? So I would say that language is the same thing. Now, Jordan Peterson is frequently portrayed as a great hero for common sense against transgender madness. I don't see Jordan Peterson that way. Jordan Peterson entered this debate basically attacking what he called fake pronouns. Okay, zer, z.
I'm not saying those goddamn pronouns.
I actually don't have a problem with these. Okay, so if we sort of, and I should say that Jordan Peterson is more than willing. And we saw this with Theryn Meyer. I don't know if you know who Theryn Meyer is, but Theryn Meyer is a male who identifies as a woman. And Jordan Peterson was more than happy, almost gleeful, to refer to Theryn Meyer as a she and a her.
And I'm sure, I would hope that if I were a student of Dr. Peterson, that he would refer to me as
Okay, I need people to be very careful here. The reason Theryn Meyer is on the screen, as well as Theryn Meyer's American counterpart, Blaire White, is because Theryn Meyer and Blaire White are being used as psychological weapons against you. Theryn Meyer and Blaire White constitute a form of psychological warfare on the population. The request for you to surrender reality and surrender our language is made much more powerful and effective when presented by a master illusionist like Theryn Meyer or Blaire White, and would be much less effective when delivered by somebody such as Morgane Oger or Gabrielle Ludwig or Jessica Yaniv or Daniel Moscato. The vast majority of the transgender population do not look like Theryn Meyer or Blaire White. So there is a very insidious and powerful reason why they stick Theryn Meyer in your view. They don't mention that both Theryn Meyer and Blaire White have their male genitalia still intact, as does 98% of the transgender population. When you are asked questions about whether or not you're willing to surrender reality and surrender our language, you need to not think about Theryn Meyer. You need to think about Gabrielle Ludwig and Morgane Oger. The vast majority of transgender people don't look like Theryn Meyer and have no requirement to look like Theryn Meyer. Now, people like Jordan Peterson have been suggesting or hinting that maybe those transgender who want to be recognized as women should look like Theryn Meyer. But that is an insult to not only everybody who identifies as transgender, but it's an insult to women in general who don't look like hypersexual porn stars. That is an extraordinarily reductionist and sexist thing to say, because most women don't look like that. Most women don't have any desire to even attempt to look like that. Some women couldn't look like that if they tried desperately, and that's one of the things that Blaire White is always putting out there, that you have to try to look the part. Well, most women don't have an urge to try. What a woman is very easy to understand. It is determined by your chromosomes. You are either XX or you are XY. That is a very simple thing. Now, most people can be identified for what the sex they are when they're born, in the vast majority of cases, and we don't need to go beyond that. Saying that you have to look this way, you have to look like the hypersexual porn star to be a woman, is extraordinarily insulting to women. But the main thing for everybody to keep in mind here is that Theryn Meyer constitutes a form of psychological warfare on you. That is why Theryn Meyer is on the screen. So beware.
And I'm sure, I mean, I would hope that if I were a student of Dr. Peterson, that he would refer to me as she and wouldn't have a problem with that.
Okay, let me find out then.
Arises,
let me find out. If she were a student of yours, what would you call her?
She.
You would. Okay.
So now you had some arguments about why the category of woman should be expanded to include people like you. Now, obviously, you're doing everything in your power to present yourself to the world in a manner that makes you easily categorizable.
absolutely, and I guess I don't necessarily even think of it that way. You know, I don't think I want to be seen as woman, so I'm going to do all these things to be viewed as woman. I do all these things because I am a woman. I do all these things just because it comes naturally to me. And the end product happens to be a subject that in people's minds is easily registerable.
Well, that's also, I would say, that's an act of politeness on your part. You know, so one of the things people concluded when I first made my videos is that I wouldn't use he or she to refer to, well, say someone like yourself who wants to be referred to as she. And my attitude about that was never that.
And conceded that she could use the word woman, but Peterson basically slammed his fist on the table in one interview and said, "I will not use your damn fake pronouns," right?
So there's all these pronouns that have come up. You're playing this radical collectivist left-wing game. You're trying to gain linguistic supremacy in the area of public discourse. You're doing that using compassion as a guise, and you're pulling the wool over people's eyes. I use whatever pronoun seems to go along with the persona that they're projecting publicly.
So you would respect their choice on an individual level?
Yeah. But with a more contentious pronouns, je and je and that sort of thing, that's a whole different issue. I'm not doing this. That's that. I'm not using the words that other people require me to use, especially if they're made up by radical left-wing ideologues. My goal was, I'm not saying those goddamn pronouns. And the reason I'm not saying them is because they're made up by left-wing ideologues. And I don't like left-wing ideology. And I know where corruption of speech leads. And I'm not going there. Try to say the truth. No matter what. Because the alternative is worse.
The truth no matter what, and that is the real problem that you see with being forced into using these made-up pronouns.
Yeah, absolutely. It's my language. I'll take responsibility for what I say. I am not saying your words.
Okay, so let's just take a minute here to review exactly what it is that Jordan Peterson has said and the implications thereof. But the first thing that we need to do is Understand who and what Peterson is. Peterson is probably the world's leading, preeminent system and corporate establishment apologist. He regards the jackals and hyenas that run the corporate world as our natural top lobster Darwinian leaders. So what you're going to see here is you're going to see Jordan Peterson blaming everything that's wrong with society on radical collectivist leftists. And that's because he has an agenda, and that agenda is to demonize any sort of sense of human compassion whatsoever. And that is what he calls the left. There is a very good reason why Jordan Peterson was a keynote speaker at the Trilateral Commission. It's because he is their boy. Jordan Peterson will blame all of this stuff on the radical collectivist activists. Meanwhile, it's his corporate buddies in the Royal Bank and TD Bank and the corporate world who have funded the transgender agenda, and without whose money they would not have gotten anywhere. And this is going to include, critically, the pharmaceutical establishment, who Jordan Peterson, as a psychologist, is a big supporter of. One of his chapters is entitled something to the effect of, "Why won't you just take your damn pills?" So we know who he represents. The Trilateral Commission also included representatives of the pharmaceutical industry, such as Yasuchika Hasegawa, chairman of Takeda Pharmaceutical, one of the largest manufacturers of puberty blockers in the world. Do you suppose they are opposed to the transgender agenda and the transitioning of children? Henry Kissinger, and no less a figure than Jeffrey Epstein. Yes, the very same Jeffrey Epstein associated with underage prostitutes. These all would constitute what Jordan Peterson calls the top lobsters of society, our natural Darwinian leaders. And we should all just clean our rooms and not trouble these men, because we might screw up the world if we try to.
And if the power was in your hands, assuming you had the competence, which you don't, you wouldn't have done any better. And even if you had, there would have been someone else waiting right behind you to shoot you the first time you actually tried to do anything good.
Then there's somebody like Mark Burnett, the producer of the television series Survivor, which engaged in, as I illustrated in another podcast, a massive brainwashing operation, basically, to make it clear that nobody should be questioning the transgender agenda. Well, who is Mark Burnett? Some sort of radical leftist collectivist? No, Mark Burnett is the man who more than anybody built and helped put into power Donald Trump. Look at some of the leading transgender voices out there. One that we're talking about here, which is Theryn Meyer and Blaire White. Both of these figures are conservatives. Theryn Meyer was even the president of the Men's Rights Club at Simon Fraser University, where we both actually went to school. So hardly radical left-wing collectivist activists. Okay, so let's pay very close attention to who Jordan Peterson is identifying as the enemy. Is it transgender ideology, or is it something else?
You're playing this radical collectivist left-wing game. Especially if they're made up by radical left-wing ideologues. And the reason I'm not saying them is because they're made up by left-wing ideologues.
Okay, so here we have Jordan Peterson blaming everything on this radical collectivist left-wing politics. But that's just because Jordan Peterson needs to blame everything that is wrong with society on what he calls leftists. But the thing is that all of this transgender nonsense is not leftist. It is something unique unto itself. Traditional leftist ideology was more focused on class consciousness, okay? So the fact that, for instance, in our society, the average person keeps getting poorer and poorer and poorer, while the super rich keep getting richer and richer and richer. So leftist ideology would address something like that as being critically important, and all this transgender stuff would be considered incidental at best. But Peterson can't have you thinking that. Peterson has to have you thinking that if you are opposed to the top lobster, super wealthy, super rich, that means that you're a crazy nut job who denies physical reality. The thing is that I am actually on the left, but in sort of this class sense, in the sense that I believe that we have a corporate wealthy elite that have run amok and who are draining the lifeblood out of the average person in society. But I don't support any of this radical trampling of women's rights in reality. What Jordan Peterson wants you to do is he wants you to blame these guys instead of blaming these guys, the guys who really have the power. Peterson actually is okay with surrendering reality. So he's willing to recognize that a man, if that man is sexy enough, can be called and referred to as a woman and treated as a woman. I don't. I believe that physical reality is absolute. So be very careful when you're listening to Jordan Peterson and what he appears to represent. Now let's take a closer look at exactly what he's saying and some of the failures in what he is saying.
You're playing this radical collectivist left-wing game. You're trying to gain linguistic supremacy in the area of public discourse. You're doing that using compassion as a guise, and you're pulling the wool over people's eyes.
So here I'm actually going to argue that it's Peterson who is pulling the wool over people's eyes, because what he is doing here is he is essentially taking what he calls fake pronouns off the table and forcing people to use either she or he.
So you would respect their choice on an individual level?
Yeah. But with a more contentious pronouns, she and je and that sort of thing, that's a whole different issue. I'm not doing this. And that's that. I'm not using the words that other people require me to use.
Oh my, Jordan, those are such strong, manly words. Let's just see if you can live up to such manly words.
And I'm sure, I would hope that if I were a student of Dr. Peterson, that he would refer to me as she and wouldn't have a problem with that.
If she were a student of yours, what would you call her?
She.
You would? Okay.
I'm not using the words that other people require me to use.
Seems to be a bit of a contradiction there, Jordan. I thought you weren't going to use the words other people required you to use. And yet Theryn just bats his pretty eyes and you just collapse like a house of cards.
I'm not using the words that other people require me to use, especially if they're made up by radical left-wing ideologues. I'm not saying those goddamn pronouns. And the reason I'm not saying them is because they're made up by left-wing ideologues. And I know where corruption of speech leads. And I'm not going there.
We know where corruption of speech leads without Jordan Peterson telling us, because anything that disagrees with Peterson's worldview leads inevitably to the gulags.
It's like, what? Do you think a person can believe something is true and false at the same time? Do you honestly believe that? That's bloody postmodern neo-Marxism, man. And if you ever want to rescue your father from the belly of the whale, you had bloody well stop speaking mistruths you know to be mistruths. I just work here? Oh, you just work here, huh? Well, we're all gonna be just working at a bloody gulag if you don't clean your room.
But the truth is, it is not left-wing ideologues who are pushing this agenda. It is the establishment.
And I know where corruption of speech leads. And I'm not going there.
But you are going there, Jordan. You have already gone there. You have already conceded that you will call somebody that you know is a male a she or a her or a woman, as long as they look sexy enough. In fact, you are corrupting our language far worse than even the most radical far-left extremists ever could. If we accept what you are proposing, we will no longer be able to determine whether we are talking about a male or a female in a sentence. I can imagine no more of a chaotic and corrupting violation of our language than that. And that is what you promote. Sie and Zur is nothing compared to that. So, for instance, let's just take the following sentence. My cousin went down to the corner store and bought some groceries for me. She paid the clerk, then came back home, gave me the groceries, and I told her how thankful I was for her assistance. Now, if we follow your suggestion here, we will no longer know if we're talking about a male or a female. Whereas if we accepted Sie and Zur in that sentence, we would actually increase clarity, and we would know exactly what we're talking about. Whereas under your proposal, her, who knows what that's referring to? Could be a man, could be a woman, could be somebody who's transgender. We have no idea. So you are the great corrupter of language. And this stubborn refusal to accept new pronouns is insane, and actually helps to serve the official agenda, which I believe is looking to control and manipulate language and reality, and turn over interpretation of these things to the state and the establishment that you represent. As I've said, I cannot imagine a greater assault or corruption of our language than that. I cannot imagine anything more confusing and corrupting than what you are suggesting. And we know what corruption of speech and not telling the truth leads to, don't we, Jordan?
Look at yourself before you end up with a dirty room and get us all sent off to the gulag.
So let's do a little thought experiment here. Okay, so you've got somebody like Morgane or Theryn Meyer who say that referring to them using he is offensive. Okay, so what do? I say, well, let's come up with some new pronouns, or use some of these new pronouns that other people have made up, like sie and zur. But then Jordan Peterson comes along and says, no, I refuse to use those damn fake pronouns. We're not going to use those. Okay, so we take the fake pronouns off the table, and we are left again with just she or he. You can either be truthful and say he, but then in comes Jonathan Kay, who's going to say, no, you're not allowed to do that because that just means you're impolite and nasty. So that forces us back into using she and surrendering language and erasing women from our language. That is not an acceptable solution. Okay, so Jordan Peterson is willing to surrender she and her, but he will not surrender sie and zur. Well, that is exactly what Morgane Oger wants. Morgane Oger doesn't want to be referred to as sie and zur. Morgane wants people to trample reality, to turn reality on its head, and be referred to as she and her and a woman. And Jordan Peterson is willing to grant that to Oger. You will note in this tweet that Peterson sent out regarding Oger that Peterson is very careful. He's always very careful with his words. Peterson does not say at any point that Oger is a man.
What would you call her?
She. Or a he or a him. Peterson assiduously avoids that. And that's because Jordan Peterson is not the champion of truth that he claims to be. Jordan Peterson is more than happy to refer to men as she and her and as a woman. And when you look at the fact that Peterson and Oger seem to be on the same page with the she and her pronouns, one has to wonder about that. That is why I say Jordan Peterson is not part of the solution, he is part of the problem. And that should not be a surprise, because I have said for some time that the transgender agenda is not a left versus the right debate. The transgender agenda is coming from the establishment. It is a top-down agenda. And Jordan Peterson is probably the leading establishment apologist in the world.
Try to say the truth.
No, try not. Do or do not. There is no try.
If she were a student of yours, what would you call her?
She.
You would. Okay.
Try to say the truth. No matter what. because the alternative is worse.
Say the truth no matter what. And this is what Jordan Peterson says. The truth is that Theryn Meyer is a male and should be referred to as he and him. The truth is that Theryn Meyer, just like Blaire White, has male genitalia. Just because you can't see that genitalia doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But its very existence proves what the truth is. A magician may appear to saw a woman in half on the stage, but that doesn't make it true. A champion of truth would speak the truth, which is not something that you are, Jordan. You are a champion of confusion, confusing our language, and a champion of deception. You are championing the idea that illusion is reality, that Maya is reality, when philosophers and mystics since the dawn of time have all understood that Maya is not reality. You are a pretty poor philosopher, Jordan Peterson, and you are a weakling. Maybe try standing up for the truth.
Do you think a trans woman is a real woman?
Try to say the truth, no matter what.
Do or do not. There is no try.
Do you think a trans woman is a real woman?
Here is your chance, Jordan. Say the truth.
I don't really like the way those questions are formulated. You know, I don't know what that means. What do you mean a real woman?
Now, is it true, Jordan, that you don't know what she means when she asks if a trans woman is a real woman?
That is why you fail.
If you're born a man and you wish to be treated as a woman, what are the minimal obligations that you have to undertake in order to be granted that, let's say, privilege?
To be regarded as the gender that you identify as commonsensically within your culture.
Yeah, okay, well, that seems to be at least reasonable.
If she were a student of yours, what would you call her?
She.
You would, okay.
Try to say the truth, no matter what.
The truth is that Meyer is a male. That means Meyer should be referred to as a man, and the pronouns associated with a man are he and him. When you refer to a man using she and her, this is essentially a lie. You are misidentifying them, and once again corrupting our language. So if you want to always speak the truth, now's your chance to be strong and brave. Now I have said, and I have conceded, that if referring to Meyer as a he and a him is just too offensive, okay, the compromise is to use what you call fake pronouns, but which are in fact a reasonable compromise that does no violence to our language and does not erase women from our language.
It's my language. I'll take responsibility for what I say. I am not saying your words.
But the problem is that if we accept what Jordan is saying there, then all we have on the table is she and he, okay? And that's a problem, okay? So if the word she does not, as a pronoun, does not refer to a female, then what pronoun does? Okay, there is no pronoun then. So the transgender activist movement likes to say that people are trying to erase their existence. I would say it's the other way around. Because they are seizing the language that used to solely identify females, they are erasing biological women from our language. And this is a serious issue. It's also kind of what I call a neurolinguistic game that they're playing, because what happens is that when you refer to a male using female identifiers like she and stuff, you're opening up areas of the brain previously reserved exclusively for females, right? It's kind of like the neurological equivalent of opening up women's change rooms to men, right? So it's a kind of like almost a deep magic thing, like deep psychology that's going on. So I resist that as well. But George Orwell talked about the fact that, and I'm spending a little time on this because this is important, right? So George Orwell talked about the fact that if you look at decaying societies, one of the things you'll see is a decay in the language, because language naturally expands to include new things. So 20 years ago, texting was a nonsense word. So Jordan Peterson and some of his followers say, well, "zer" is a nonsense word. Well, half of our language was a nonsense word sometime. As new things are introduced, we create new words to identify them and clarify them. If we get into a situation where a language starts contracting and becoming less clear, that's a bad thing, and that's what we see happening in this particular instance. Back to Orwell again, he suggested that if you could, in a society, get enough control of language and manipulate language enough, you could actually maneuver society into a state where people would not be able to describe their own oppression. Okay. And the best example I have of this is a radio interview I did with Carleen Nation in Toronto, actually Mississauga, I think it was. She's a former CBC reporter, and I was on her radio show, and we were talking about the Jessica Yaniv case, right? And I was trying to explain in the course of that interview why this was such an outrage. And I said, well, here you've got a group of women who provide women-only services, intimate women-only services for waxing and stuff. And Jessica Yaniv comes along, who's male, and he's basically trying to use the law to force these women to provide waxing services around his genitals. At that point in the interview, Carleen stopped me and said, no, it's her. Okay, I identify Yaniv as a woman and as a her and as a she. Okay, so if I agree at that point, okay, and if I say, okay, I know that Yaniv is male, but you say I have to use the she and her and stuff, rework that sentence, okay? So trying to force these women to perform waxing around, not his, but her genitals. You've just taken away the ability to describe the outrage that is happening. See, and that's what Orwell talked about. We saw some of the stuff that's going on in terms of pronouns at the Megan Murphy event that you went to at the Crystal Pavilion at the Pan Pacific, or whatever that is, when Jonathan Kay responded to Morgane Oger, and I think you were sitting next to Morgane. You weren't there on the date, were you? No, okay. Right. So Morgane Oger got up and spoke, and Jonathan Kay started off by saluting, saying, "I salute you, Morgane Oger," which I was like, here's this person who's been trampling women's rights left, right, and center and engaging in all of these outrages, and he's in a room full of women who are not fans of that type of thing, and he's saluting Morgane. But we'll put that aside. But then he started surrendering the language to Morgane, saying, she and her, and got into like a debate with, well, this is an act of respect, exactly what Morgane is talking about.
Okay, I want to just spend a minute doing a little setup for this clip of Jonathan Kay from the talk he did with Megan Murphy at the Crystal Pavilion in Vancouver. I want to ask you to pay very close attention to how Jonathan Kay, who I call a system apologist, that was one of the original editors for the National Post, and has taken part in proclaiming those who undermine trust in government as conspiracy theorists. So pay very close attention to how Jonathan Kay is trying to reinforce and return faith in the institutions of power that have failed us in this transgender debate over and over again. And do note that there has been a call put out by the leaders of society for the press to help restore faith in the system.
We live in a time when people are losing trust in their institutions. It is the job of every single person in this room, members of the press, to uphold and renew that trust.
And then also pay attention how he refers to the women in the room who want to use language in a way that reflects reality. He refers to them not as being merely impolite, he refers to them as being gratuitously impolite.
So, in the interest of creating dialogue, I would like to salute you, Morgane.
Another origin story is that men in armor would raise the visors of their helmets to greet their lords or commanders.
I would like to salute you, Morgane. Thank you for coming. Thank you for asking your question. You asked it in a spirit of of respect. So, Morgane, I disagree with much of what you put on Twitter, but Morgane is an activist. The job of any activist is to state her cause in a maximalist way. Wait a sec. All activists do this. It is the job of other people in society, editors, lawmakers, judges, human tribunal adjudicants. It is their job to balance the claims made by different activists in a sensible and humane and non-dogmatic way. It is the job of other people in society, editors.
It's the job of editors, Jonathan? Why, that's you, Jonathan. Oh, you're gonna find truth and balance for us, are you, Jonathan? Wow, I'm glad to hear that. I feel so much better that we can rely on people like you and on our court system that, for instance, ruled that a father couldn't refer to his daughter as a daughter anymore. We should just have faith in our system and editors like you, shouldn't we, Jonathan?
Lawmakers, judges, human tribunal adjudicants. It is their job to balance the claims made by different activists in a sensible and humane and non-dogmatic way. The people who are activists and who state their cause in a maximalist way, Morgane is doing her job. Her job. It doesn't do you any good to be gratuitously impolite.
You're trying to gain linguistic supremacy in the area of public discourse. You're doing that using compassion as a guise, and you're pulling the wool over people's eyes.
Her job. It doesn't do you any good to be gratuitously impolite. I've admitted that. But if you want to create dialogue, if you want people to take you seriously, be polite, be respectful.
You should also note that Megan Murphy does not have anything to say about Kay's surrender of language or his shaming of women. Now, it is unfortunate that I was not there, because had I been there, Jonathan Kay would not have gotten away with his assault on language, nor his shaming of women. I would have been all over him in a second. This is why I have said for some time that although I support much of what Megan has done, she is weak on language and quite clearly fits in with the corporate big pharma-friendly fallback position that the National Post gang and the Toronto cabal are pushing and trying to use to prove that they are the heroes of common sense. What they are offering is just a watered-down version of the same nonsense that the transgender activists have been pushing for so long. They are fake champions of free speech and are full participants in the assault on language and the continued trampling of reality and the assault on our most vulnerable children that I've been trying desperately to get the National Post and other publications to pay attention to. But they ignore this because they don't want the public getting this information and realizing that they are part of the agenda and not really opposed to it at all.
She came into a hostile room, stood up and asked a question.
And then some of the women in the room sort of spoke up and went, it's a he, it's a him, it's his, and they were quite angry. And Jonathan Kay tried to use social shaming to get them into line, saying, well, you need to just be respectful. You know, you're not going to get anywhere by being disrespectful. But that's, again, this is that social shaming thing where they're trying to force people into surrendering language that I think I've been able to illustrate here is more than just a trifle. It's important. Language helps us organize and understand our world. And we have specific pronouns for females, and those need to stay in place. And that's why I'm a stickler for correct use of pronouns.